and welcome to this regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, June 5th. It's now about 7 or 8 minutes after 2. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee. I'm joined by the Honorable Paul Koretz. I'd like to invite, if there are other members who are planning to attend today, I'd like them to please come on down to room 1010. We're going to be starting this afternoon with our closed session items. Bless you. We'll be starting with our closed session items. We have a kind of a lengthy agenda today. We have 13 agenda items, and we'll be taking general public comment when we return from closed session. If there's anybody that would like to comment on our closed session items, you'll need to do that now before we go into closed session. So, is there anyone? If you want to comment on closed session items, just raise your hand. I don't see any. If you want to comment on any other agenda item that's on our agenda today, still, please fill out one of these white cards with the agenda item indicated, and we will take those comments as we address those individual agenda items. So with that, Mr. Kretz and I are going to retire to the other room for closed session, and we'll be back as soon as we complete those matters. And 7, I think, are appropriate as consent items, unless Mr. Kretz or Mr. Rosendahl, you have any comments or questions about any of those?
My end.
All right. Then,
He's fine.
Then the recommendations on those items will be the actions of this committee on consent. Thank you very much. And that brings us then to, we're going to take item 13 out of order because we have a number of people here who wanted to speak about item 13 who are here. So as a courtesy to them, we're going to be taking that item out of order without objection. Looks like there's some more coming in for 13. Okay. So,
Councilmember, item number 13 is a motion, Weezer Krikorian, relative to instructing the City Administrative Officer to report with the current status of the Community Facilities District for the Downtown Los Angeles Streetcar Project, including recommendations, maps, resolutions, and other documents necessary at this stage.
So maybe what we should do is first hear the report, then we'll go to the comment from the public on this.
Okay.
Welcome.
Certainly. Sarai Baga from the CAO's office. The report before you is in response to a motion instructing the CAO to initiate the formation of a community facilities district for a streetcar system in downtown Los Angeles. Included in the report are a couple of resolutions that will need to be approved, including the resolution of intention to establish a community facilities district and authorize a levy of special taxes. This includes the rate and method of apportionment, which details how the tax will be calculated. This is also the document that would be presented to voters at the time of an election. It also includes certain contingencies that must be met before the city can issue bonds. The other resolution is a resolution to incur bonded indebtedness, which is just another document that needs to be approved as part of the process. The contingencies that are spelled out in the rate and method of apportionment are the certification of the environmental process would need to be provided to the CFD administrator. Secondly, the project would need to be accepted by the Federal Transit Administration as part of the project is seeking federal funding from the Small Starts grant program. So we would need to have approval by the FTA for their project application. And the third contingency is that they would submit as part of their grant application a plan that would specify operations for a minimum of 20 years. So bonds cannot be issued until all of these contingencies are met. And the documents that are included in this report are the initial documents needed to initiate the formation of the district. A couple of things I just wanted to point out in the report that I was made aware of after the report was released is there was a statement in here that said that the Streetcar Initiative organization had provided information that fares would be sufficient to support operations, annual operations of $5 to $7 million. That information actually came from a CRA study. It did not come from the organization. And then the second point I wanted to clarify is I also
But
included...
is there agreement on that point?
I'm sorry?
Is there agreement on that point?
No, there is not sufficient information for us to provide any opinion on that.
Okay.
And then the second point that I wanted to clarify is regarding the comment about the uncertainty of CRA funding. I was made aware that the Oversight Board did approve their commitment on May 26th. So the CRA portion has been approved.
Okay. Members, any questions on this
My
item?
first question is this. If you look on your page 1 of the memo, the issue of who will own and operate the system is undetermined at this time. Could you help me through that? Explain that.
I will defer to the council district on that issue. That's an issue that is an open issue, and we don't have any additional information as to who would own and operate the system.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. The
And
question
before
of,
Mr. Rosenthal,
my name is
can you
Jessica
identify
Weddington
yourself for the
McLean.
record, please?
I represent Councilmember Jose Huizar in the
Always
Great
state your name for the
14th
record.
District.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl. The issue of who will eventually own and operate the system is something that will be determined in the next 6 to 8 months. The federal government, as part of the federal funding plan, requires that as a very official operational document and a bunch of other requirements that they have. Right now, we're talking to Metro and DOT to see how that exactly works out, and we will be working that out. It'll come back to council as part of our application for small starts funding to the federal government, but they require very specific long-term operational agreements. And we also, as Sarai was mentioning, there is a contingency in the CFD, in the RMA of the CFD, all this alphabet soup, that basically protects the property owners and the city so that no bonds will be drawn on the project, no tax will be levied until that operational agreement to the satisfaction of the federal government, not just our city, is ironed out, hammered out, and sealed with.
Last question is, how much money is all this when you add it all up in your mind?
It is approximately a $125 million project. It's anticipated that it'll be a public-private partnership. So we have 10 from CRA, we have $1 million from local return that we're getting through ourselves through environmental and engineering. Next comes construction funding. So it's a pretty good public-private partnership on the model of Portland and Seattle and Atlanta and all the other streetcar cities.
And just envision where it starts, where it ends.
Sure. If you start at the top of Broadway, for instance, at First and Broadway, and you go all the way down Broadway to 11th Street, you go over 11th to Staples LA Live in the Convention Center, you go north on Figueroa to 7th Street, back across 7th Street past the Target and the new Target and the kind of restaurant row that's occurring in downtown, left-hand turn on Hill Street, up Hill Street to First Street, and then back down around Broadway. So it makes a little bit of a backwards L across the downtown
And
area.
what's your sensing of how many folks will use that?
Well, it's, I would refer you not to my sense of how many folks will read it, will use it, but Theron Peers actually conducted a study as part of our alternatives analysis process that was required by the FTA, and their analysis projected that this particular route would pull in between 6,610 and 8,390 riders daily. This means that the downtown LA streetcar would basically outpace the Blue Line on its opening day, and it would double or triple the ridership of 4 of our 5 best performing dash lines in downtown. So that's really good ridership, and those were, my understanding, rather conservative numbers because they were going into a document, a cost to benefit ratio analysis for the federal government, so you have to be sort of conservative. So we feel pretty good about the line
The last
ridership.
question is the streetcar itself. Are we going to create a new vehicle, or tell me that last one.
They're modern streetcar vehicles that right now still run on catenary wires. The potential exists that a wireless system may be developed by them, but we're not, we don't know at this point. They're modern vehicles, low floor. They're ride on, ride off, roll on, roll off. So there's no stairs to climb. It's completely ADA friendly. They're air conditioned. They're actually beautiful transit vehicles.
Thank you.
Where are they being manufactured?
We do not know that yet. However, good question. The federal government does have a Made in America provision, so we'll be, definitely supporting our own local economies and going that way.
Okay, good. Mr. Kretz?
No questions.
So there's a number of resolutions contained in the recommendations. The
Yes.
import of these proposed actions, if we were to take them today, is what? I mean, are we making an irrevocable commitment to this project, or is this just moving the ball forward and keeping
It's
our...
moving the ball forward in terms of forming the community facility district, which is a portion of the overall plan for this project.
Okay, great. So we have a number of cards. Why don't we go ahead to the public comment on this item now. We'll start with, and we'll have 2 minutes per speaker. We'll go with, first with Peyton McEllier, followed by Shiraz, looks like Teneri. Sorry if I have that wrong.
Hi, Peyton McEllier. I'm with Evoke Properties. We're a large downtown-based owner-operator of real estate developer. We own approximately 6 acres of parking lots in South Park along some of the key routes for the streetcar. We're absolutely in support of the plan. We stand to be, I think, in the top handful of people that would pay under the assessment created by the CFD. For us as a developer of those lots in South Park, as an owner of some warehouse buildings and some things that stand to be converted, getting new transit options and things like this on the table is really essential to our vision for South Park and what we want to build out down there. So we're absolutely in favor of it. We think the CFD is the right way to go. We absolutely favor and encourage this type of thing and giving everyone a chance to vote on it come the fall. So again, we're supportive, and thank you for the opportunity to move it forward.
Great, thank you very much. Shiraz?
Good afternoon, council
Sorry,
members.
I think I may...
No, not a problem. I've been called worse.
I know the
Shiraz
feeling.
Tangri.
I know the feeling, believe me.
Shiraz Tangri of Alston Bird. I'm here today in my capacity as a board member of LA Streetcar Inc. LA Streetcar Inc. is a nonprofit organization that was formed to really represent the private sector in this public-private partnership. It's very appropriate that this committee, Budget and Finance, is hearing this project because while it's certainly a transit and transportation project, it's really an economic development project. A little over a year ago, LA Streetcar Inc. commissioned an economic development study performed by AECOM to really look at what the benefits are for the private sector as well as, of course, for the city in this partnership project. And the findings were an estimate, conservative estimate, of over $1 billion, $1.1 billion in new development over the third-year life of the project for the entire downtown region. That's looking at growth above a growing downtown that has been doing successfully well. So you're looking at, I'm forgetting the number, but I believe over 9,000 new jobs, thousands of new residents, thousands of feet of new office space as well. Councilmember Rosendahl asked about the route, which is extremely appropriate. The route was designed after a couple of years of intensive discussion, a number of public outreach meetings, to really identify locations where streetcar could take people from current centers of activity like Bunker Hill, like the Civic Center and the Convention Center, Staples Center, Restaurant Row, but also take them to areas of downtown that have not had transit, do not have good parking access, and consequently have not had the same level of economic redevelopment that the rest of downtown has, supported by the Red Line and other transit development over the last decade. So the nonprofit will continue to represent the private sector's interests. We are extremely concerned that the contingencies in place be used to protect both the city's interests as well as those who will be asked to pay some part of the share as we leverage dollars from the federal government, the city, Metro, as well as the private sector in making this project happen. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Daniel Taban, followed by Eric Metz. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Daniel Taban. I work for a firm called Jade Enterprises. We're a real estate investment and development firm based in downtown Los Angeles. Our assets range from parking lots and parking structures, office buildings and retail holdings throughout where the route will place. So we're very much affected by this. We are first reached out to by the streetcar organization about several years ago, and also through multiple of the organizations such as the DC bid and the Fashion District bid as well. We see this as a great project for not only downtown Los Angeles, but the city of Los Angeles as a whole, and has a great ability to improve the city. And we're very much in favor of the CFD district as well. We feel it's the best way of getting the project moving forward.
Great. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Eric Metz, followed by Ann Nguyen.
I'm Eric Metz from LA Streetcar Inc. I'm just here in technical capacity to answer any questions you guys may have as pertains to LA Streetcar Inc. and our role in the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ann Nguyen, followed by Kent Smith.
Good afternoon, Ann Nguyen, on behalf of both the Downtown Center Business Improvement District and the Central City Association. For a bit of background, CCA has not yet taken a position on this project, but the Downtown Center bid voted to support it after a very long and contentious meeting. That bid support was predicated upon a commitment that a public entity would fund all the operational costs of the project, and no further assessment would be levied upon the upon the property owners down the line. We've been informed by our property owners that the current language in the RMA document does not sufficiently guarantee this for them. We do understand that the project is on a very strict timetable, but we really strongly recommend that representatives from the streetcar continue to engage in further discussions with the property owners so we can come up with language that both sides can mutually agree upon. Thank you.
What was this contentious business you're talking about?
Some owners felt very strongly for the project, and some owners didn't, and it was a very heated debate. But the bid board did decide to support the project in the end.
But why did those against it? Why were they against it? I just want to know their logic.
Excuse me? Kent can shed further light on that.
Fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kent Smith, and then I have a card. Jessica, do you want to speak again? Or okay. So, Mr. Smith, followed by Jessica Weatherford McLean of CD14.
Good afternoon. My name is Kent Smith. I'm the executive director of the LA Fashion District bid. We represent property owners, and approximately our property owners are about 25% of them are going to be subject to the CFD assessment. And like Downtown Center, we have strong supporters, and we also have some skeptical property owners. And I think the issue comes down, this is being viewed as a return on investment. So, you know, the parcel tax is there with the hope that in the future the streetcar operations will allow people to increase rents and increase property values. And it's a great theory. I think the concern everyone has is around those contingencies to make sure that the project is going to be operated for the length of time that the property owners are going to be assessed, which is 30 years. Right now, the document only assures the operation for 20 years. That's caused some concern. And there's concern to make sure that the project is run effectively in terms of the hours of operation and the fares, so that the ridership projections that the consultants are forecasting actually come to fruition. So those I think, are the issues, and that's why we've got property owners strongly in support and others who are much more skeptical because of the concern around, will this be a real great return on their investment? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Jessica Weathington McLean for Councilmember Weezer. I'll submit for your reference a couple of documents. One is a list of supporters that supported our last Tiger grant application, and it ranges from our Congress members to our senators to the redevelopment agency to the bids to various property owners, the neighborhood council, tons and tons of property owners, to the Archbishop Emeritus of the Los Angeles's Cathedral of the Angels. So we'd like to submit that. Also for your reference, a list of outreach and events that have occurred, public workshops, things like that since 2006 on this project, just so you understand sort of the trajectory of things. Mr. Smith was correct. There's certainly no project that I'm aware of that's going to satisfy 100% of the people, 100% of the time, 100% of the ways. What we do know is that the vast majority of people that are being asked to invest in this project are fully supportive. You've heard from folks today that have assessments, or you have heard and will heard from people today that have assessments ranging from $200,000 to $500,000 every year for 30 years, and they're here to support it. They're here to say, we believe in this project enough that we're saying tax us for it. We will partner with you. We think that's very powerful. The assessments that we first brought around, actually, methodology is sort of an iterative process, and it has been going on for a couple of years. Do we assess land plus building? Do we assess only land? How do we do this? And things have changed substantially. In fact, at one point we had operations in there, but that was a non-starter for the property owners, so we've taken that on and said, Metro DOT, you have to work with us here. The assessment numbers we brought around 2 years ago were 40% higher than they are now. There's no number that's going to make everyone happy. Property owners that have built out property didn't want to subsidize parking lots. Parking lots feel that, there's always someone that's going to feel like it could have been better. We think that land assessments, land is land is land, and it's very fair. Whether you've built it or not, it's land. So we're very pleased with this process. Certainly it's not 100%, but we are very pleased with it, and we have no objection if the city should choose to add a 30-year provision on operations to match the bonds. That 20-year language came from the FTA because that's what the operational requirement that they have calls for, a minimum of 20. If the city policymakers should decide to go 30 to match the bonds, we have no objection there.
Great. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Patrick Spillane, followed by Steve Needleman.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Patrick Spillane with IDS Real Estate Group. We are the property owners of an approximately 6.5-acre site just north of LA Live, and I am here to speak today in favor of the streetcar. We would be a Tier 2 property, so not immediately on the line, but would have an annual assessment of approximately $120,000 per year, so it is certainly not insignificant. We view this as a rare opportunity in a city like Los Angeles to invest in our urban infrastructure, to create a transformative public-private venture that would change the way we move about downtown Los Angeles. The streetcar would serve to unite the last mile of the billions of dollars invested in hard and light rail investments, our rapid transit lines, our dash routes, and would serve to really move the people of downtown efficiently and state-of-the-art. In so doing, the streetcar group has basically adopted a formula that has worked in other cities, so we're not doing anything new, and in fact, we're basically just recreating what works. As far as the assessment methodology goes, we think it's fair, and as it is based on property lot size, it is really the lowest common denominator by which anybody could be assessed, and frankly, we don't see a better way to do it. We do understand that there could be some folks who don't support it, especially those who have underutilized real estate, i.e. surface parking lots. I would posit to you that the highest and best use for a piece of property in downtown Los Angeles is not as a surface parking lot. And so as a result, while I am empathetic to their concerns, I don't think they're necessarily maximizing the use of that lot, of that land for the benefit of our city and certainly for our job and our tax creation. I'd like to thank Councilman Weezar for his leadership on this issue, and also to thank both you and the rest of the City Council for your leadership as you take the next steps in moving the streetcar process forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Steve Needleman, followed by Russell Brown. Mr. Needleman, welcome.
My name is Steve Needleman. I'm a property owner on the main line and owner of the Orpheum Theater. I have properties in also Zone 2 and 3. I'm a member of the Lassie Board and treasurer of the organization. Have been part of the streetcar concept for many, many years, strongly believe in it. I think the main comment I'd like to make is really related, as previously enough's been said on the things, other than that the ones that do object, no one's wanting, and I'm not wanting to pay anything for these traffic or a transit system. The reality is city, state, federal aren't paying for these in full anymore, and the only way to get that subsidization is by the private investment. We are taking a major stake of private investment from the property owners. It's not easy, but we got to suck it in to make it to this next generation, to bring a positive transit system that connects all of downtown, makes it happen. We're paying for a big chunk of this. We all want to make sure that it's nothing that's done before and that cannot be guaranteed. I know part of the organization that I'll make sure that making that happen, and I know the rest of the board will too, that we're not getting ourselves in and we're not charging ourselves until we have a locked-in plan. This, as was said earlier, is another step in the process that we hope will continue and stay on track. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Our next speaker is Russell Brown, followed by Blair Besson.
Russ Brown, 11-year resident of downtown LA, 8 years with the Downtown LA Neighborhood Council. I'm presently in charge of the Neighborhood Council's Transportation Committee, previously with the Historic Downtown Bid and the Bringing Back Broadway trustees. We've worked more than 5 years with the community on this, both developing the understanding of whether they wanted to move forward with the streetcar. We took field trips to Portland, Seattle. I've been to New Orleans many times. We're familiar with the historic streetcars there. I'm actually from Memphis, where they have streetcars. Atlanta is starting a brand new system. But what we saw when we went to Portland was whole neighborhoods were completely reborn when they were connected to the rest of the city. That's what we know we can create downtown. If you look at Broadway, Broadway in many ways is abandoned because it's not connected to the residential neighborhoods and the walking neighborhoods of downtown. So this will take you from the Civic Center and the Music Center through Broadway and the Financial District. Imagine Broadway in the Biltmore, all the way down to the South Park, Stadium, LA Live, Convention Center. Imagine 2/3 of downtown you will no longer need a car. With the streetcar and the regional connector and the red line and the blue line and the expo line, you'll be able to go almost every place in the city, all focused through downtown. And that will bring a lot of new customers and businesses, and will also create whole neighborhoods where parking and cars are not the primary concern. It'll create pedestrian neighborhoods and sidewalk cafes. So we work really closely with the property owners to make sure we came up with a denominator that fits everyone. We talked a little bit about the public-private partnership. Measure R is exactly that same model. We can't go to the federal government and say, pay 100% of the transportation. The federal government says 50 or 60% of it has to come locally. We're using the same model here, and we feel we have a great project to move forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Our next speaker is Blair Beston, followed by Cyrus Davudian.
Hi there. Good afternoon. I'm Blair Besson with the Historic Downtown Business Improvement District. In May, my board voted unanimously in favor of the project. Most of them are Tier 1 and Tier 2 on the route. I think that it's not just because of the numbers, but also because they did change the structure to the parcel plan. I think that caused them to feel more favorably about the project, and then also in the outreach meetings discussing the fact that the assessments would be deferred until the funding is in place for operations. I think those are the kinds of things that have been put into place that make this project a little bit easier to swallow. I mean, I've worked for developers for a long time, and I know it's very difficult to ask them for more money. But they see the long-term benefits for this. Everything's already been said, but they definitely support this project and see what it will do for downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Cyrus Davudian, followed by Tim Mccosker. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Cyrus Davudian. I work for the Elson Company. I've been working in downtown for so many years, and I strongly believe in this project. Our group really support this project very much because we have many properties, especially historical theaters on Broadway, and we believe that this project is going to help us. And also I did a personal research in downtown, talking to our tenants and talking to our retail. Even they are very excited because they employed so many people that they have parking problems, and I think they're very much interested to see that this project is going to happen. And we know the consequences of assessments, that we believe that this is going to generate so much excitement in downtown, and we strongly support this project, and I hope this project is going to happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Tim Mccosker, followed by Jorge Flores, and that's the last card I have on this matter as of this moment. So if anyone else would like to speak, please fill out a card and bring it forward right away. Mr. Mccosker.
Thank you. Tim Mccosker, Mayor Brown Law Firm, representing System Property Development Company, one of those parking lot operators that you heard about previously. There really are, and these are general comments, there really are two areas of concern that one can articulate. One could articulate a level of concern on the relative impact for different types of properties, and that's going to be specific to a particular client, in this case system development, land development. And the other is more of a structural concern about this guarantee, one of these preconditions prior to the levy of the special tax. Getting to the issue of the assessment methodology, a parking lot, and particularly my client, would have the concern that what we are doing with the land area allocation is you're taking property owners who have much less density, and I will say a lower use of the property, and imposing the tax upon them as other property owners that might have a more intensive use and a greater capacity for income. In a free market, of course, the comment will be made, well, if you choose not to develop your property, that's your problem. Well, in a free market, of course, folks would develop their property if they could. There may be parcels here that cannot be developed or cannot be developed now, and they're getting hit harder than other properties around them. So we've raised that issue, and we're going to continue to raise that issue to see whether or not you can I know you can under Mello-Roos, but whether under this Mello-Roos assessment you can distinguish between densities and uses of property. More importantly, more significantly for everybody in the room, including the city in the room, is this issue of the precondition and whether or not there's going to be an operator or money for the operation of the facility. We would agree with the CIO's office that there are concerns about the ownership, operation, responsibility for future deficits on this property. What you have is precondition language, which I think is a valiant effort, but really what it requires is under the federal small starts funding program that there be a finance plan and a commitment for 20 years. You've already heard about the request for a 30-year, but I would say take it out of, we don't know whether small starts is going to be the program that folks utilize in the future. I would say, seek and ask for a funding mechanism and a guarantee where whatever public or private entity we will not be at risk of year-to-year allocation under their budget. If the city were to guarantee, for example, from year to year you can make a choice, you could pull out, and now we're stuck without operational money, and who's going to get hit by the property owners.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Flores, and that's the last speaker I have on this item unless anyone else brings a card forward. Mr. Flores.
Good afternoon. I'm here on behalf of the Sam and Trinity Sale Trust at 809 South Los Angeles Street. I am also a board member of the LA Fashion District. Just as a point of information, tomorrow the Fashion District Board is going to vote on whether or not to take a position on the streetcar at its board meeting. One of the issues that we have, we certainly are in favor of the LA streetcar. We think a streetcar is important to the continued renaissance of downtown LA, but we feel that there's still too many unknowns to move this project forward as is. Specifically, we're concerned about the Mello-Roos funding mechanism. Mello-Roos, we think this is the wrong use here to create a CFD. The choice of Mello-Roos stands to disenfranchise all the property owners, whereas they have skin in the game, but the voters of the district, the actual residents, are the ones who are going to approve the project. So they don't have any skin in the game, but they're asking all the property owners to actually fund the project. We think that's a horrible use of Mello-Roos and unintended, was never intended to be used this way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rosendahl?
A technical question.
CAO.
Is this going to be a wire that it's connected to, or how is it going to move around, or is it going to be an electric vehicle, tracks?
The CAO hasn't been provided with that kind of information. I would have to defer to
CD14.
CD14.
Doing great.
Happy to answer. The plan at the moment is, Jessica Weathington McLean for Council Member Jose Huizar. The plan at the moment, Mr. Rosendahl, is for a catenary wire. There are some systems that are under development that would allow us to do a streetcar without the catenary. Whether those are ample enough to handle the grades and topography challenges that we have in downtown remains to be seen. So at this moment, it's a catenary wire, just as it was in the historical system. So we're basically restoring the streetcar system to the streets of downtown.
Thank you.
Mr. Kretz? Okay, so just again, because a number of concerns have been expressed about whether it should be a Mello-Roos mechanism or otherwise, and how allocations should be made among these various property owners. I assume that by going forward today, the dialogue among the stakeholders is not going to cease today, correct?
Absolutely. We've been working with properties for a couple of years. If you don't mind, I'll address the Mello-Roos issue. This is the proper mechanism. Mello-Roos is a community facilities district, so the way to do a community facilities district is through a Mello-Roos. What Mr. Flores may have been referring to is the voting mechanism, which in a Mello-Roos you can have property owners vote. However, in order to have the property owners vote, you cannot assess residential, which in downtown LA, where we have 50,000 people living in apartments, would have been a significant addition to the assessment on the property owners, because those parcels would not have been able to be included in the assessment if only the property owners voted. So this is a vote of registered voters. That's why we've been working with the property owners for a number of years, to make sure that when we got to this point, they were comfortable with the methodology, they were comfortable with things, because at the end of the day, if you support streetcar, it's kind of not that relevant who actually votes, because you've gone through the process of getting it to the point where you support the project.
And I'd just like to clarify that the document that's attached to the resolution, the rate and that is what will need to be approved and presented to the voter. So if there are any changes that the committee would like to make or the council would like to make, then it would need to be done in the rate and method of apportionment.
Okay.
My understanding is it comes back to council as the resolutions go forward, and then there's a notification period and a public hearing of some sort. I'm not exactly sure what that process is. And then it comes back to council as ordinances based on these resolutions. So I do believe if we're going to make changes, that's today. So if the policymakers decided to match the 30 with the 30 of the bonds, that may be something that you wish to send forward to council, so that that change could be made in the RMA before it comes to council, if that was your decision.
Colleagues? That was my understanding as well, that it still has to go out there. There'll still be a subsequent hearing date on the ordinances themselves.
There will be a public hearing based on the resolutions, and then we'll have to come back to you with additional documents that will include additional resolutions and ordinances to move the formation forward. So you will have another opportunity to look at the project as a whole, but the rate and method, you need to decide what it's going to look like in its final form.
What would the argument be against matching the 30-year period? Is there any reason not to do that today?
I can't think of an argument against it.
In my opinion, Councilmember Krikorian, no. Obviously, your names are on the doors. You're the policymakers. The 20-year was language that we lifted from the federal government because that's their policy. Certainly, it's at your discretion to require more or less than the federal government. We have to prove up 20 years of operation for the Fed, period. We will not get money through small starts or any of the other grant programs. They all require that. They're not going to give us, $50 to $60 to $70 million for a project that's only going to run for 5 years. They aren't going to do that either. So we were comfortable with that level of provision. If the council chose to match the 30-year bonds with the 30-year provision, certainly that's your choice. We can't move this project forward until we have that agreement. And the project isn't going to go if we don't have it. So between 20 and 30 years, you're wiser than I in terms of that, but we're comfortable that we'll get there.
Mr. Kretz?
Any chance the federal government would view this more favorably if we did the 30 years?
I might defer, please, if I might, to Robin Blair from Metro, who's here.
Sure.
I've never done a streetcar project before, and he might have a bit more wisdom than that.
I don't think any of us have either.
No, we haven't, but he's done plenty of rail and regional rail, and he's done these grants before.
Robin Blair, Director of Planning for Metro. The simple answer is the more that you commit, the more they have confidence in you. So the longer you go, the more they have the belief that the city is actually getting farther and farther involved in the project. And that's just a rule that we work by. We look for every form of commitment, local, the citizens of the surrounding area, property owners. They become part of the record for FTA, and it is something that they are literally in the process with us today, and literally have gone even from last year where there were applications from the city requesting money, and they will ask what is the level of commitment. So that is something that's compared against the nation. The more that there is unity, the more that there is confidence, the better they feel about putting money in any project.
Seems like the 30-year would make sense if there's no outstanding reason why not to do it.
Okay, then, yeah,
I'll make that motion.
And I'll second it.
Okay. So then, if we can move forward with the city attorney, the CAO's recommendations as amended? Then? All right, then that'll be the action of this committee without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that amendment.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming down, and thank you for your continuing work on what we hope will be another transformative project for downtown Los Angeles.
Councilmember Krikorian, excuse me, in the CAO's report, it may be a good idea to revise the error in the operational funding section where it says that according to streetcar, fare box and ads will be sufficient to cover operations. The sentence should have been will not be sufficient to cover operations. So we would hate for someone to go back to this report at a later date
Can you
it's on
point to
page
that, please?
2 of the CAO report. Just like any other transit system, streetcar will not pay for itself by ad revenue and fare box alone. There's going to be other, kind of revenues needed for operations, which is part of that agreement we've all been talking about. If we could correct it on the record, I'd hate for someone to, because she mentioned it in her initial report.
It's in the report, but it's not part of the recommendations.
Correct.
So
but
we can consider the report amended then to make that correction.
Okay. So that would be great. So that if someone's doing research on this in a year, they don't come back and read a report that was.
Would you mind submitting a corrected report so that
okay.
there's a piece of paper in the record that shows that as well?
So just to
or just revise this report before Wednesday, or would that be?
I don't think that meets the city
I don't
clerk
know.
process. It would have to be a memo
A memo.
to Budget and Finance Committee.
Sorry?
So just to confirm, it'll be a memo to Budget and Finance Committee clarifying this particular portion of the report, that the information regarding fares supporting the system, we just don't have enough information at this point to provide any information as to whether or not it will support the system.
Fair enough.
Fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. That brings us then to item number 3. Sarah?
Item number 3 is a Joint City Administrative Officers Chief Legislative Analyst Addendum Report relative to policy options for citywide economic development functions.
Okay. Who's presenting item 3?
Excuse me?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Patty Huber with the CAO.
Ivania Salvaro, CLI's office.
Did you want an overview, or did you just want to ask questions, or?
I think you should give a brief summary.
As part of the consideration of the next fiscal year's budget, our offices were asked to report relative to the $2 million that had been included in the proposed budget but eliminated from the adopted budget for our economic development proposal. After much discussion, we have made a recommendation to take $2 million from the reserve fund as a loan to be repaid from either incremental revenues or sorry, I forgot the other. The purpose of this, however, is really to use the funds as matching funds for outside private donations to our economic development functions. We think it's important that as a city we've put that money up there so that people in the private sector see our commitment to moving to a new model. The monies would be set aside in the unappropriated balance, so they would not be expended prior to a $2 million match being developed and deposited with the city.
Okay, I guess I have to ask a really fundamental basic question first. I don't understand what this money is being spent on. The Housing Committee and Economic Development report said that it would fund a consultant staffing and program for the new economic development model. The Personnel and Animal Welfare report indicated that this would approve in concept and implement the city's economic development goals and projects. And Jobs Committee said that they approved the concept approved in concept the establishment of an economic development entity comprised of a new economic development department and a new economic development nonprofit organization. I'm still entirely unclear on what the $2 million does. It's certainly not enough to actually do economic development in any kind of a statistically significant way. I assume this is strictly for consultants and preparation of a strategic plan of some kind, or is it?
The $500,000 that was left in the budget is anticipated to go to the consultant support that our offices need to continue to flesh out this idea and put it into implementation. The $2 million was seen as seed money towards our re-envisioned economic development activities, and at this point we are anticipating matched with private dollars that the mayor's office is already out soliciting.
Okay, and I see our deputy mayor here, so if you could come on forward, maybe respond in more detail to that.
Good afternoon. Matt Carrots, Deputy Mayor for Economic and Business Policy. Just to add to Patty's explanation, it is our vision and our intent, hopefully, to use most, if not all, of the city funds, as we would call it, for not only studies but also for overhead costs, which would include salaries. Overhead costs, which would entail everything that is needed to start a so-called nonprofit, staffing it accordingly, and one of the uses or reasons for asking for these funds is to also get matching funds from the private sector. But it is not the only reason. The main reason is to get an entity up and running as quickly as possible, and it would obviously be used for matching funds as well. But no, it would not be used for economic development investment opportunities. That would not be the reason why we're asking.
So how would the mission of this new entity, for example, differ from LAEDC?
Surprisingly, I think Bill Allen downstairs waiting to meet with me on this very issue. LAEDC is a fantastic organization that does a lot of its work countywide. It probably is one of the preeminent agencies, conducts studies. And so I see no reason why this new entity wouldn't actually work very closely with an organization like LAEDC in coming up with sound strategies, whether they are geographic strategies or industry-specific strategies. They do that. They do it very well. And it's actually going to be one of my messages, if he's not listening right now, as to why we think we could be actually very good partners, we being the nonprofit, with an organization like LAEDC, and that would apply to many other very, very good organizations out there.
So the work product would be something similar, except with a City of Los Angeles focus. It would be strategic planning, it would be studying, it would be advocacy, it would be coordinating other governmental entities and nonprofits and other stakeholders who have an interest in economic development towards an LA-based, City of LA-based economic development strategy.
Not only that, but we believe that they can actually play an even more direct role in actually implementing as well. For example, I think it's been mentioned in the past that when we look at asset management, if you look at it in a holistic way, in a strategic way, where you really focus on its I would say, how to leverage it for economic development purposes, we would envision this entity driving the actual transactions, not only the thought process and strategy behind how to utilize city-owned real estate, but actually executing on them.
LAEDC is primarily a think tank type of project
They don't
and
implement.
model,
Right, but-
whereas the
and-
city
and
was
that's
looking
where
for a proactive, where we would be able to take some of the studies and actually implement and putting them into play, and or make it, whether it's a loan type of product that we need to get out, underwriting, actually doing the small business programs, actually getting out there and getting our studies and then putting them into play. Making them
Okay. Okay, so would it be part of your vision that this entity, this new entity, would itself directly subsidize a significant development project, for example?
I'm sorry, directly subsidize it.
Well, in the same way that, a redevelopment agency might, for example.
Well, one is, we would, I guess I would wait until a study is completed to determine exactly what we believe that nonprofit ought to look like. But there may be a model under which there are certain funds that flow through various city departments today that may be considered for redirection, where those funds might get implemented into a specific transaction. But the funds that we're talking about, the $2 million, was not part of the original vision of those dollars actually going out to Project X in.
Okay. That's my main concern. Okay.
And the city is, one of the things we will have the consultant look at is where do we need to be going back to the state requesting specific powers or ability to expand what we can do for certain kinds of things. For instance, we are limited by surplus property rules. Maybe we can find ways to ease those for redevelopment purposes. That's part of what we would ask the consultant to help in order that this nonprofit entity can then maximize all the resources that the city can bring to bear potentially, as well as outside resources to really help drive a more robust economic development program in the city.
Okay. So lastly, this is structured as a reserve fund loan that would be repaid with unanticipated, I guess unanticipated is not the right word, but.
Well, either revenues that come in excess of budget from either TOT or sales tax, or reversions from departments that again are in excess of what we have budgeted, assumed in adopting the budget.
Okay. And assuming our budget assumptions turn out to be very accurate and those things don't come to pass, then we have to accept it's a $2 million hit to the reserve fund.
I would say that at that point, because the money is set aside in the UB, that is a decision that the council will have to make at a future point, whether they would release those funds from the UB for actual expenditure or not. And
I see.
You would have to revisit that issue.
So the release of the funds would be contingent on receipt of those unbudgeted new revenues.
You could make it that, or at that time you could decide that you were willing to take that $2 million and apply it to this function.
Okay.
So you get another opportunity.
Unless I missed it, what was the reason why this wasn't in the budget, and why would this not compete with any of our other priorities that aren't funded in the current budget for that funding?
The $2 million was included in the budget as proposed by the mayor. This committee and then subsequently council elected to take that $2 million and reprogram it to other uses in the adopted budget.
So why would we be changing that now before the ink's even dry on the budget?
One of the instructions in the adopted budget was for both the CAO and CLA to report back on this issue and find other opportunities for filling in the $2 million. We don't have other special funds. We have reported per the budget instructions. We believe this is an important area that the city needs to commit to. This is really important for us to begin looking at ways to drive economic development in the city, which is important for us from a revenue standpoint, from a job standpoint. we just feel strongly that this is something we should be doing.
And my sense of the discussions in the budget process were that not necessarily that people disagreed, but that there was a sense that the consultant should do some work and have more of a sense of what our plans were before we funded it. Any indication that that thinking has changed in the short time since?
Well, council just acted on our report relative to the economic development consultant and the whole report last week. So we are in the process of now looking at how we will get a consultant on board. We've been given a 45-day report back on the economic or on the nonprofit entity, which is a major stretch for us, but we're pushing forward.
Okay.
I'm just curious. We put $500,000 into this, correct? Can't you wait a while before you come back for another $2 million on this and come up with other strategies? And right now, I mean, it was a heck of a process to make our budget, and that $2 million was programmed for obviously other needs, and we thought $500,000 would set you up to at least figure out what you're going to do and where you're going to go.
Some of the impetus in this is the activities by the mayor's office, who have been actively reaching out in the private sector sections where people are interested.
We have you, Matt, answer that.
Sure. Councilman.
Matt, your name?
Yes, Matt Carrots, Deputy Mayor, Economic and Business Policy. Since the drastic news on the CRA, many people have taken out their pencils and tried to analyze exactly how much the city was going to receive as a function of their dissolution. And people have noticed that there's actually tens of millions of dollars coming back to the city. And some people will argue that most of those dollars, if not all of them, should be redirected to economic development purposes across the city. The mayor proposed in his budget $2.5 million for this entity, in large part to demonstrate to the city of Los Angeles that we were prepared to take on economic development, even so the CRA was eliminated, and that we, short of the CRA, the city had no consolidated entity focused exclusively on economic development. And for those who have done business in other cities around the country, they reminded us that actually many cities have a very, very mature economic development.
That. And when Joe Chiswick came to me, he was then chair of the Greater Chamber, I totally agree with this concept, and we totally need to go forward. We went up and looked at San Francisco, see what other people are doing. So where is this money stream, fresh money coming from the CRA that we didn't budget in expenditures for this particular year's budget?
No, Councilmember Benson, I would say these dollars are actually dollars that, for all intents and purposes, are in the reserve fund. So the recommendation here would...
Reserve gone up?
No, right now, the fiscal year hasn't started, and in fact, this current fiscal year hasn't closed. So we don't exactly know where we will end up relative to the reserve fund at year-end close. However, we believe that, as Patty has mentioned, this is an important issue. The $2 million would be a loan out of the reserve fund with the anticipated payback to occur from unexpended dollars from the current fiscal year that would otherwise have reverted back to the reserve fund. So we will know when the controller issues her preliminary financial report in September whether or not we have extra dollars, so to speak, that will be going to the reserve fund. So in essence, those the first call on those extra dollars going to the reserve would be to pay back this reserve fund loan.
Could we know that in September? I mean, could we wait until it's now July or August? No?
Well, we would know what the reversion number is in September with the controller's financial report. What this action would do is strictly move the funds to the unappropriated balance, which would still require council action before any of those dollars actually get spent or get moved to any other department. So in essence, these dollars will just be now earmarked for economic development, but cannot move out of the UB without additional council action.
So I think that's an important point, and that gives me a little bit of comfort, because, you know, here's the problem. I mean, in addition to what's been raised by my colleagues, I understand that this is a repayment that would come from additional revenues that aren't currently budgeted. But that is $2 million that we then don't have available to address unanticipated new expenses that are also not anticipated in the budget, for example. So we're taking away some of the upside to deal with some of the downside, and that puts us into a more difficult situation as we go into continuing unpredictable fiscal times. We worked really hard to try to maintain the momentum towards building our reserve fund towards our 5%, and that was a core mission of this committee that we succeeded very well in doing, I think, by bringing our reserve level up to the highest level it's been in recent years. So I'm sort of jealously protecting that as much as we can. On the other hand, we're clearly left without very many tools at all right now to deal with some of the basic economic development needs we have in this city since the CRA dissolution, and so that's a concern of mine as well. I had a number of programs that were really successful in helping small businesses that were dependent upon the CRA that are now gone, and so it's an important step we need to take. I gather that if this loan entailed a transfer to the UB, subject to further action by this committee and the council, that transfer would be sufficient to meet the needs of providing the seed money for matching funds from the private sector.
That's my understanding, yes.
I'm happy.
He's doing all the work.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm looking at you, because I expect you're the one that's coordinating these. So
I think that would be sufficient. I think in large part, I think the private sector is really looking for a consensus, general consensus from the city elected body that this is a priority, and I think everyone realizes the financial constraints that the city is in today. I think the fact that council has committed funds for the purposes of growing the general fund and the tax base is very encouraging to many people. And I think that we will continue to work on the private sector to get matching funds, because we have concluded and did so very early on that without a true public-private financial commitment, that this would have a very hard time at succeeding.
So I know that this is, peanuts in the big scheme of things, but does the CAO have any concerns as, the entity that has to go out and deal with our credit rating agencies and other analysts? One of the big arguments we've made is, we're making progress on our reserve fund. The reserve fund's going up. If we go back now and say, well, it's going up, but it's going up $2 million less than we thought it was, is that a concern in terms of our credit rating or, the TRAN or any of the other concerns that we have?
It is not a concern. It is why we wrote it specifically as we did, that it was a loan and it was for amounts in excess of what was budgeted, so that at the end of the day, the budgeted reserve fund should be whole, so that we don't lose the progress that we made in adopting the budget. And that's one of the reasons why it is structured as it was.
Assuming those things, in fact, come to fruition.
Correct.
But we don't know that they will.
If they don't, then, as I said, that then becomes a secondary discussion on whether or not we continue moving forward with that too, and the impact on the reserve fund in relationship to all the other things that you have mentioned. The budget is a plan, and then life happens, so we will deal with it as we need to.
Councilmember, if I could just add to that.
Yes.
As instructed by the City Council, this office has been working with all the departments to unencumber prior year funds, and those are some of the funds that would otherwise also revert to the reserve fund at the close of the fiscal year. We're not sure where we are, but that is one of the sources of funds that could potentially offset this reserve fund loan And just to add to the discussion here, we understand that these are one-time funds for a potentially ongoing investment. So that's one of the considerations that the City Council and the Mayor will have to consider in building the 13-14 budget, how we could find a more permanent source of funding for these activities on a go-forward basis.
Anything further? Mr. Kratz?
Yeah, I have the same concern that you just expressed, that we were told that even 1 million less in the reserves could trigger a downgrade, and now we're looking at taking 2 million. Probably my greater concern is that we've agreed not to do any layoffs for 6 months, and the last thing I'd want to do is allocate an extra $2 million that wasn't budgeted and then be laying people off in 6 months. So with that as a possibility, as long as that possibility looms out there, it'd be very difficult for me to vote for this.
Mr. Rosenthal, anything further? So the recommendation includes authorization of the transfer to the reserve fund and appropriation within the fund. I'm not sure actually of the budget mechanics of this. If we were to do the transfer, can you do the transfer without that appropriation, so that that appropriation would await further action by the council?
What the unappropriated balance is, you know, imagine it as being a department on its own. So you would still need to make an appropriation to the unappropriated balance.
So that has an identified line item?
Yes. Yes, so it will, if you.
That money doesn't.
It will stay.
Spent.
It will not be spent. It'll stay within the unappropriated balance. And in fact, we have language within the body of the report that you may wish to add to the recommendation. And that is language and basically that talks about that the 2 million would only, the use of the 2 million would only occur after privately raised economic development funds of the same amount were identified and or spent in accordance with the city's policy direction. And that's on page 2, the second to last paragraph.
And from a mechanical standpoint, we can't spend money from the UB. There's no mechanism to spend from the UB. All it is a setting aside of money by specified line item. There have to be subsequent actions before funds could be expended. And they'd have to be transferred to a department for expenditure.
Okay. So then if we're going to add that language that you've just indicated into the recommendation, can we also, I mean, it's redundant, I suppose, but just as a belts and suspenders thing, add to the end of that sentence, and further action and direction by the city council?
Of course.
Does that give comfort? Okay. All right. So if we can do that, that would be my suggestion. That we would approve
let me clarify the process once more. So the money would go into this fund. For us to spend it, what would have to happen?
The CAO and CLA would have to come back to you with a report, with a recommendation to transfer the money from the UB to a department and specifying accounts and what it would be spent on and what we would be using the funds for, and council would have to take a specific action to approve that.
Would it come back to council, or would it come back to budget committee first?
Oh, it would come through the policy committee.
Yeah. And just to add to that, we would make the transfer and appropriation in the UB. Some time would pass. Our deputy mayor and his team would go out and have further discussions with the private sector based on that information. Hopefully we would be able to have some commitments of private funding. We would have the benefit of initial analysis after July 1st of where we were with our year end and so on, whether there's funds that can be swept. And only after all that information is gained would the council then make a decision about whether or not to go ahead and spend this money.
Correct.
That, I mean, that's a lay person's way of saying it, but is that about right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's good.
Fair enough.
Okay. So without objection then, as amended, that will be the action of this committee. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to take that other item out of the 11? All right, could we go to item 11, please, because I know we have a number of department representatives here waiting on that item. I don't have any cards, by the way, so again, let me remind you, if anyone is here to speak on a matter, you need to fill out a card and bring it forward. All right, let's go to item 11.
Item 11 is budget motion, Weezer Wesson, relative to adding 2 city planning associates for new community plan work on the Boyle Heights community plan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee
Good
members.
afternoon.
Roy Morales with the CLA's office. Budget motion 20 was introduced by Councilman Weezer during the budget deliberations, proposing to use $220,000 from the Budget Stabilization Fund to fund 2 community planning associates to restart the Boyle Heights community plan. That community plan was stopped in 2010 because of budget shortages. The council asked our office, the CLA, as well as the CAO and the planning department, to look for an alternate source of funding. They did not want to use the Budget Stabilization Fund or the general fund. We met with the planning department and we met with Council District 14 and the CAO's office, had multiple discussions, and I believe we've come to a solution. We found that a portion of the community plan for Boyle Heights has a transportation improvement and management plan, which is eligible for Measure R funding. So that portion is eligible, and we've worked with the CAO to try and identify the appropriate accounts from Measure R to be used for that. But in the meantime, we would suggest that one of the 2 positions be funded with the existing allocation in planning department, and we will come to you in the first FSR with the CAO and identify the actual accounts for that first position. The second position that the planning department requested, because this plan, in order to restart it, takes 2 positions in order to be fully staffed in order to move forward. The second position is actually a policy decision from the council that would be needed. As you know, the Hollywood Community Plan was just approved by council. There's still some more work to be done, but there will be resources that will be freed up by that adoption, and we propose that this committee recommend to the Plum Committee and to the council that resources from that, one resource from that plan be taken and reassigned upon completion of that plan, reassigned to the Boyle Heights plan. So that would give the second position. That is an existing position that would not require additional funding. And the third component, in fact, when we met with Council District 14, this is a high priority for them. And they've also offered to close the gap, in case there are any funding sources, to close the gap using their CLARTS funding, available CLARTS funding. So when we come back, and if you approve this item as recommended, when we come back during the first FSR, it will have a compilation of funding sources. Measure R would be one, CLARTS will likely be another, and there may be other funding sources, but it will all be non-general fund.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Eva Yuan McDaniel, Deputy Director of Planning Department. We appreciate everyone's hard work to make this happen. The Hollywood Community Plan was adopted last week, and we need a couple more months to wrap up the work and get all the cleanup work completed. We expect sometime in September, we should be able to free up some capacity to kickstart the Boyle Heights plan if that plan is adopted. And then we do need an additional position. One of the reasons that we need to start right away was because the Boyle Heights community plan actually was initiated back in 2006. It's been quite a while. And some EIR work and TIM work has already been completed. Maybe in the average of about 20-25%. We need to have adequate capacity to pick up that work, revisit it, and also re-engage the community to get started. So this is not a plan that has a slow start. We need to jump in right away. And with 2 planner positions and with our existing like senior city planner and city planners to oversee the community plan, I think we should be able to do a very adequate start.
So on that point, though, I mean, candidly, most of our community plans throughout the city need updating. How are we triaging this? How is the department prioritizing how to go about having a comprehensive citywide update of the community plans?
There's 35 community plans that we need to do. And back in 2006, we started a new work program called the NCP, New Community Plan Work Program. not only we reassess all the needs in the community, we also look at new ways to do our community plans to make it more fitting with the community's needs and with the changing needs of the entire city. And back then, we had a list of criteria that we used. For example, the building activities in the community, and also the economic needs, and also the social needs in the community. And the citywide policies, for example, currently we're very heavily into transit and transportation needs. And also we look at the other work programs in the department that, so we approach this with a very comprehensive method. And back in 2006, Councilman Rosendahl probably recall, we assessed the entire city, and we started with 6, and also Hollywood, continue Hollywood. So in 1 year, we picked up 7 community plans. It wasn't because we're overly ambitious, just the needs were there. Our plan back then, and in 2007, we presented a report to council with an overall approach. Our approach was each plan will be revised updated every 10 years, which means after the first rush of many plans, when we kind of settle down, we will start a 4 on, 4 off. So 4 community plans will be adopted each year, then 4 new ones will get picked up. But that takes money. And I was quickly doing some calculation. In order to do the 4-plan cycle, it costs about over $3 million. And we just don't have that kind of funding. So that's why the community plans have been taking so long to work on, because the initial vision was 2.5 full-time equivalent capacity, and we got in the past 6 years only at about 1 per plan. So the planning department now, with the new work program and the city's new direction, we will continue to reassess each community's needs in their planning, and also community engagement is a very important factor in our assessment. And our plan is in coming July, in the next few months, we will start looking at the assessing the additional community needs, because as you know, after Hollywood, we're not stopping. Right, very soon, San Pedro will be in front of you, hopefully, and then Selmar, Granada Hills, and also the South LA, Southeast LA, and West Adams. They're all coming forward one at a time.
I might add that I want all my community plans done and have been kicking it pretty hard for a few years now. And the sooner the better, the more support we give it. For God's sake, it's the beginning of a development project. Yeah. It's the beginning of jobs and a multiplier effect. So we're with you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, I mean, we're all in the same boat. I know Mr. Rosendahl and I have been waiting for a Palms plan, West LA plan for years. I've got other projects like a mansionization issue in my district. How does this impact that? Does this take away staffing from other things that are in the queue?
No, Councilman, actually it will not. The planning department has several unfunded resolution authority positions, and which we have been able to work by working with the CAO and the CLA to retain. So when the funding is available, during the first financial status report next year, we will submit a manager hiring request to activate one of the vacancies. Our existing capacity will not be impacted in regards to the other work programs.
Okay, and I don't know if this is exactly on target, but I've been hearing that maybe the CAO's office can answer this, that the CAO has been looking at holding some positions that were authorized in the budget until departments come up with a 5-year plan. What do we need to do to not allow that to happen, to not stall hiring people that were in the budget process?
Sorry, sir. Ben said to say, that actually does not sound like something we've instructed any department to develop a 5-year hiring plan. I think it's just looking at a 4-year forecast. not sure what any department would be able to come up with a 5-year forecast to say, a one-year hiring plan would be tough enough to come up with. So I
hopefully
think
this is just an unfounded rumor, and we're not going.
I believe so. I do know that we have asked some departments, in particular those with special funds that are on the kind of cusp of requesting rate increases, to put together a hiring plan for the next fiscal year, to just give us a good sense as to when they're going to come with their unfreeze requests to the managed hiring committee. But I know for a fact that the managed hiring committee has not asked for a 5-year hiring plan of any department. We have asked for a 1-year hiring plan for individual departments.
Well, I would be relieved to hear that, especially with planning, because they have a lot of backed up work. So any positions that they need to have hired, hopefully will get done expeditiously. Thank you.
Anything further?
No.
Mr. Chair, if I can just clarify, as we recommended, if you do approve those recommendations, we do recommend, in deference to the Plum Committee, that the subject matter of committee plans, the priority setting, is actually within their purview, and we would recommend that this go through them, or at least be referred to them for possible hearing.
It certainly should be referred to them on that score. And the question I have is, is that part of the recommendation even essential to this? One of the recommendations would be that the council establish the Boyle Heights Community Plan as a priority plan. It seems to me that's Plum's job, not our job. I do appreciate the creative thinking, though, that's gone into the funding for these positions. And I think I feel comfortable, colleagues, if you do, with moving forward with the CLA and CAO recommendations on this. Is A essential to this? That I haven't.
A would be, this is the recommendation that it be established as a priority plan. Yeah. I believe if this committee is given the indication to the planning department that the intent is that this plan be staffed, in other words, this is the next plan to be staffed, I think that's sufficient.
Okay.
A is not necessary.
Then with that exception, I would go ahead and suggest that we move forward with the recommendations and refer the matter to Plum.
Thank you. And if I can make one last clarification, yes. I noticed on the council file itself, there's actually a separate budget motion regarding Measure P. Measure P is the Budget Stabilization Fund issue, and it is moot now because we've found an alternate source of funding. So motion Perry Parks can be received and filed, or noted and filed.
Okay. Without objection, that'll be the action of the committee.
Thank you,
very much.
members.
Very good. All right, that brings us back into numerical order now at number 8, please.
Item number 8 is the Office of Finance report relative to the accounts receivable quarterly report for the third quarter fiscal year 2011-2012, representing accounts receivable for the period ending March 31st, 2012.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So Todd Bowie with the Office of Finance, and my counterpart to my right will go ahead and introduce himself and also the item, but also wanted to maybe ask if our Inspector General is here also in the audience, if it would be okay for him to join us, although he didn't participate in this particular report. I know going forward that we'll be working with him on this, and it's maybe a good opportunity to introduce.
He's certainly welcome to join us at the table. I'm not going to put him on the spot by asking him to comment on this item yet, because I know that he's going to give thorough analysis to this in his new role as our Inspector General. Mr. Campos, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Honorable members, Fernando Campos, Inspector General with the Office of the CAO's office. Glad to be here, glad to be part of the city team in terms of doing the role for the Inspector General in revenues and citywide collections. Although I did not work with the Office of Finance on this report, the matter before you is definitely moving in the right direction in terms of our accounts receivables. Without going into the details of the report, this is an effort from the Finance Department or the Office of Finance to actually demystify what the accounts receivable accounts are and what reality is in terms of what we can actually collect and what we cannot collect. So without further, I won't go into the details, and I'll just put it back to Todd for a thorough explanation of the report. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Let me just say on behalf of this committee, welcome aboard. Your arrival has been long awaited, and and much demanded by the community, by all of our constituents, who are very concerned about our collections process. And so having the collections sheriff, if you will, which has been euphemistically, your position has been euphemistically referred to, on board, is very good news, and we look forward to working with you.
Excited to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. All right.
Hi, I'm Edwin Avanesian, Office of Finance. So this report before you is the accounts receivable quarterly for the third quarter for the period ending March 31st, 2012. We introduced a new concept called the net accounts receivable, which is basically the total accounts receivable amount subtracted from the uncollectible balance as determined by departments. And using this mechanism, we're able to reduce the AR amount to a realizable amount of $159 million total outstanding.
I'm sorry, can I just stop you there for a minute, because I'm intrigued by the idea that each department determines what's uncollectible and what's not. Is there a citywide policy in place to make that determination, or are there guidelines to give to departments as to how to make that determination?
Presently, that is something we want to work on more. At present, I mean, it's pretty loosely defined as it's basically experience-based. What they're providing to us at this point is the same information they're providing and reporting in the CAFR to the controller's office. They're using worksheets there, but as I understand it, it's not a clearly defined. So most of them do it by aging and based on their experience in aging. As we're acquiring data from the departments, particularly in our centralized repository data warehouse, we feel like we're going to be able to help them further define that based on the experience we see.
But that's the main thing, because certainly you can't have scientific accuracy with this, because each different kind of account receivable is going to be different. Each context is going to be different, but I think having this more centralized analysis of it and the database of them within your purview is going to be very helpful. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
That's quite what I was about to. Of the $159 million that we call the net accounts receivable, $52 million of that is current, so there's a high probability that that will be collected, and $107 million is past due. And we're here to entertain your questions.
Okay. Any questions? Mr. Kress?
Yeah, a few questions. First of all, on the uncollectibles, I know there are some companies out there, I've mentioned this before, that have great interest in trying to do collections on virtually uncollectible or uncollectible accounts. Have we looked at some of those firms with those specialties, so that rather than writing them off at that point, we would say, okay, you can take 70 or 80% of what you can collect, but here it is for one last crack at it.
Yes, they're currently pending. We have in process a RFP for primary and secondary collections, but I think further to your point, the city has experimented with debt sale previously, debt or uncollectible accounts receivable and the sale of those. We did it once a couple years ago for business tax that had received judgments against it. It wasn't particularly lucrative for us against the amount of effort that was put in. We received about a penny on the dollar. Nevertheless, we do want to revisit that and potentially look at expanding it to include other departments. So there's definitely one of the items that was identified in the core report, and it's one of the items that we're also responsible for coming back to the council with recommendations on how we might proceed on something like that. So that is something that we'll be working on over the next couple of months here.
And that's a slightly different approach, because I've run across at least one company that isn't interested in buying debt for almost nothing, but they are interested in high percentage collections on what we view as impossible to collect. So it might be worth at least giving a crack to how many ever firms are out there that do that line of work, that feel that when they have a high percentage, even if it's an unlikely one, it gives them extra tools because they can spend more money on the collection effort. Another thing I noticed, the list of some of the things that we're going to do to improve our collections, looks suspiciously like recommendations that we've seen and talked about before. And obviously that's part of why we have a collection sheriff, inspector general position to ride herd on this, but there has been a mayoral directive to put a number of steps in place, and it would appear that some departments have done it and some departments haven't done it. How do departments get away with ignoring a mayoral directive and not doing all the steps that they obviously should do?
Yes, and I think you're speaking of things like applying penalty and interest and secondary collections, things of that nature. We are
even having a letter go out on city attorney letterhead. I believe that not all departments have even implemented that obvious step.
They have at this point. We also have another report that's not here today, providing updates on various initiatives of the council and also of CORE and some other studies. And so some of those are addressed in there, particularly the city attorney letterhead. We have been able to get departments to become compliant with that directive. However, other areas particularly areas that require ordinance changes, has been a little bit more slow going for sure. And as I said, in particular, penalty interest application is one area that we think there is opportunity to increase accounts receivable or revenues to the city. And so what we're going to do in that arena is we're going to we identify each and every account type out there, the corresponding ordinance and the corresponding city attorney, and basically have a matrix of each and every account and why or why not can it have penalty interest applied. And so I think through that process, we'll be able to hold a great deal more accountability than we have in the past, where we've kind of taken more of a blanket approach. And so I think that level of detail is required in order for us to get to that point.
And how do we compare currently, now that we've implemented some of these things, with some of the other larger cities in the country? Are we still doing worse? Are we comparable? Are we better? What do we think?
Well, we've definitely implemented a number of best practices that other entities out in our country have also implemented, and we can certainly provide. We had done actually a survey during the budget process at the request of the Budget and Finance Committee to identify best practices, and we can certainly share that with this body as well, so you can get an idea of some of the things that other entities out there are doing in this arena. But we feel like we have implemented a number of similar tactics.
That'd be great. That'd be good to see.
I'd actually like to have that report back here, and perhaps that's something that when we get to that point, Mr. Campos will be prepared to speak to us on that score as well.
Sure.
Yeah, and now that I'm in the position, I can work with the Office of Finance independently and do my independent assessment in terms of what options do we have moving forward, and bringing some of that information back to this body so that you can consider and know exactly what's out there and some alternatives that are available for us moving forward.
Great.
I appreciate all these comments, but just back to the initial comment here, the city's net accounts receivable total $159 million, of which $52 million is current and $107 million is past due. What do we know about that in terms of collectability in a realistic sense?
Actually, if you flip to page 3, we do have a pie chart. I'm sorry.
Well, either way.
Page 5. I'm sorry. Page 5. Yeah, it's a great number of it is in collections. So, once it goes to collections, it is difficult for that money to come in. But once the departments are referring, they're also assessing liens, levying liens upon the money, and then the other 32% is either within an appeal process or it's suspended for some reason or another, a disputed claim, for example.
Okay. With that in mind, not putting you on the spot, our Inspector General, but do you see that as part of your responsibility to follow up on that, figure it out?
Oh, absolutely.
Back to us?
Absolutely, 100%. I will be looking at those doubtful collections. I will be looking also at the additional $240 million that is footnoted in the report in terms of what it has not been collected and what's considered doubtful collections at this point. So scrubbing the numbers, looking at those accounts one by one, going through them, looking at the status, how long have they been aging, looking at what Office of Finance has done, what the line departments have done to collect it, and then coming back with a real comprehensive overlook as to the likelihood of those collections.
Yeah, because what's pleasant for me to hear is that because demagoguery runs supreme, you know, in the world today, and people can keep beating us about funds we can't collect, and we have to be real clear about that. For instance, the Medicare, Medi-Cal, those aspects on some of these ambulances and other things have to be figured out and dealt with.
And those are discussions that
Those
are discussions that need to be brought to the table for discourse. If it's not collectible, let's talk about it. Let's move it forward so that we can have a transparent discussion and open discussion in terms of whether it is collectible or not. If it's not, move it to the next step, whether it's debt sale or whether it's write-off, et cetera. But those are options that we are planning to bring back within the next 30, 45 days for discussion to this body.
And it's important for us to know that so that we can avoid the kinds of mistakes that allow us to get to the point of accruing uncollectible debt in the first place. And that's a policy question that we have to address.
And rule of thumb, the faster you collect it, it's easier for you to, once you issue the debt and once you issue the invoice, the sooner you collect it, the better. The longer you wait, the less likelihood that you would actually collect that money. So 2 years post, less likely to collect. If it's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, highly likely to collect. So that's where we want to be. We want to make sure that the process is improved. We want to make sure that we're collecting as much as we can up front and not waiting post 1 year, 2 years, because at that point we decreased our likelihood 2-, 3-fold.
So this is a really minor question, but it's just something that sparked my curiosity. We have 3 different categories of accounts receivable that you've broken down into charts to indicate their aging. One is the citywide, which excludes emergency ambulance service and parking citations, and then you have emergency ambulance service and you have parking citations separately. But the groups, if you will, of agings are vastly different there. For example, with parking citations, we have from 106 days to 1,058 days in one category, and they're not uniform among the 3. It seems to me we'd have an easier time of comparing and figuring out a strategic approach if we had a uniform frame of reference there. And so I'm wondering why that is, and whether the new CAR system allows you to manipulate the data and produce the data for us in a way that would be easier for us to make those kinds of comparisons.
Definitely so. And basically the reason why and actually the citywide aging used to be different too. We had basically were moving along the lines of some core recommendations that requested we orient the aging categories to process points. And so the parking citations one does reflect various process points. It's generally 21 days between a number of the processes that they have. And we can certainly adjust that to be consistent to the others as well, and I don't have a problem with that at all. For the ambulance billings, that is not currently part of the data warehouse, so we would have to request the department to prepare that in a different format, but I don't anticipate it would be difficult for them to do so as well. But yeah, I agree, and we can certainly make these all consistent.
Great. Okay, members, anything further? All right. I think that was just informational, right? So we receive it.
Yes. Note and file.
Note and file. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. That brings us to item number 9.
Item number 9 is a motion out of consign relative to restoring David Gonzalez Park as a clean and safe spaces class park for fiscal year 2012-13, using funds from the Lopez Canyon Landfill Community Amenities Trust Fund.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Regina Adams, Executive Officer, Recreation and Parks. This item, item 9, is a motion by Councilmember Alarcon where he is directing Department of Recreation and Parks to reinstate a class park program that was at the David Gonzalez Park. In the motion, he has put in funding for 1 year. A couple of things I wanted to correct there in the motion, and I don't mean to correct the council member, but my discussions with him were that he intended for this to be for fiscal year 2012-13 and 2013-14. It says in here 2013-14 and 2014-15. Oh. So that's the first item. And also, too, in order for us to reinstate this program, which was deleted in 2009, it's part of some budget cuts. The position that we would need would be a full-time recreation coordinator, which in the motion he mentions an unfreeze for, but we would also need an unfreeze for the part-time staff, which would be recreation assistants, and that's not included in here. And for both of those items, they still would have to go before the managed hiring committee as well. And the other thing is that we discussed, as I stated, his intention was for this to be for 2 years, but the funding source that he has placed in the motion, he can only do 1 year at a time.
Well, we couldn't budget for the next year anyway, so.
Correct.
So that, although the positions would be unfrozen, they would still have to go through managed hiring.
Well, I think the intent was to try to have it handled through this body, but as I understand it, for the managed hiring committee, it's representatives from the CLA, the CAO, and the mayor's office.
Right. And it looks, so there is an unfreeze recommendation. Yeah, okay, but it looks like that would still, it would still be subject to the managed hiring process. Okay. Is this an accurate reflection of the actual cost of the positions?
Yes, we provided this information to his office.
So this would fully fund, if
For
those
one
positions were
fiscal year.
filled, it would be?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anything?
My question
members?
is
Mr. Rosenbaum?
the Lopez Canyon Community Amenities Trust Fund. How much money is in that?
I couldn't answer that, council member.
Somebody from the CD70 can answer that? Does anybody know how much is in that fund? Well, I'd like that answer by council.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, for obvious reasons. I mean, if it's got a lot of money, maybe we got the second year and third year and fourth year in there as well. I mean, I'd like to know what we're dealing with.
All right. Well, you're okay, though, with moving forward?
But I want
All
it
right.
by council.
All right. Then we'll go ahead without objection. The recommendations will be the action of the committee. Thank you. And that brings us to item number 10.
Item number 10 is the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles report relative to a request to waive payment in lieu of taxes pilot for special program needs and public housing capital projects. Housing, Community, and Economic Development Committee waived consideration of this matter.
Good afternoon.
Ken Simmons with the Housing Authority. I think the issue before you is more ministerial in nature. This item was before you at the Budget and Finance Committee as our request for waivers for the next year. I think you incorporated the information within the budget, so those items that pay for city services have actually been adopted and incorporated into the city's budget. However, we need a formal waiver, so we need a motion that actually waives the use of these fees so that can all take place.
Okay, members, are there any questions on this matter?
Question, if I could.
Yes.
There's nothing in it from Mar Vista. Do we have any idea why?
Yeah, the Mar Vista, if you look at the attachment of the report, there was $100,000 that was set aside that we worked with your staff or with using it as seed money for a RFP to bringing a full recreation program into the Mar Vista site.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kretz, anything on this? So there's $250,000 for the Century Boulevard Extension project as part of Jordan Downs. Right. Has HACLA or the CAO explored whether there are transportation-related sources of funding that might be used for that rather than pilot funds, which essentially are rather than using pilot
Not to
funds?
do the planning of the road. The planning of the road is three-quarters of the way done. The city's already spent $750,000 out of the Black grant. This is the last portion to complete the plan. Once the plan is done, then we can start pursuing federal grants to get the road built.
I see. Okay. So this funding is strictly
For the
use
planning
of the
only.
planning stage?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, anything else, colleagues? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our action will be to approve the Housing Authority request and instruct the CAO to work with the controller to effectuate the recommended action. Very well. That brings us to item 12.
Item number 12 is budget motion Garcetti Labange relative to providing funding in the amount of $825,000 for the Hollywood Central Park.
Good afternoon, council members. Bernice Hollins, Office of the CAO. This motion is to provide $825,000 that would fund the environmental study for the Hollywood Central Park, utilizing various funding sources. One of the funding sources that's currently designated would be $200,000 in CIEP funds. However, the CIEP funds are subject to annual reversions, so these monies would not be available until several months into the new fiscal year. We're recommending instead that we provide the $200,000 instead of from the CIEP fund to provide it from sites and facilities, as those monies would be available on July 1st. That's the only modification that's needed to the recommendations here, and the CAO will work to provide the necessary support to implement these instructions if they're approved.
How does the use of sites and facilities funds differ from capital improvement expenditure program funds?
Both of them are to provide capital investment dollars. However, sites and facilities is specifically for recreational and parks projects.
Okay, but both funds are specific to capital investment.
That's correct.
Operations.
Not operations.
Okay. How about the Recreation and Parks unreserved and undesignated fund balance at $275,000 here? Is that funding available to be programmed in this way, or?
I would need the department to weigh in on that.
Again, Regina Adamson, Recreation and Parks. The $275,000 that's referred to in this motion is in our unreserved fund, and that was a commitment that we had set aside for this particular project. And what we will do is, if this is approved through the council, we will then take this also to our board in July for their approval as well, to be able to use these funds for this purpose.
Okay, so it's not currently appropriated for some other use that it's going to have to be reprogrammed from?
No.
And it's still subject to
the board approval.
As well. Okay. Anything further, colleagues? Okay, then the recommendation is to approve budget motion 48, and without objection, that'll be the action of the committee. As amended.
As amended, okay.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And if there's nothing further, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda.
Yes, were you going to consider item number 2 in the closed session?
Oh, item 2, yeah, thank you for reminding me. Unfortunately, item 2 is going to need to be continued, right? Yes. Okay, item 2 is going to need to be continued, and item 1 will also be continued for further consideration next week. And just for the record, Mr. Rosendahl, I'm not sure if your vote was recorded for the consent items. Yes, I guess it was. I guess it was. So, so we had a quorum for the consent items. So if there's no further business, committee's adjourned. Thank you very much.